to the Shop, episode 179, What You Must Know About Employee Culture with Stan Slap. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFurio. I'm your host for the show, and I'm so excited to have you on this very important episode today because we are talking with Stan Slap, the author of the book Under the Hood, Firing Up and Fine-Tuning Your Employee Culture. This is one of my favorite books of all time, and I'm pretty fired up myself to share it with you today, honestly. I think the insights here are really going to change the way you view employee culture and set you and your employees up for success in the future. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prima Coffee. You know, Prima Coffee has been a long-time sponsor of this show, and I have been a long-time fan of Prima Coffee. I've known them since they began the company, and they're truly one of the world's best specialty coffee equipment suppliers and people that I would trust with procuring the right equipment for whatever job you happen to have, whether that's for a home bar or you're outfitting a commercial coffee bar or commercial coffee bars. If you're expanding your operations, you want to update equipment, whatever it is, Prima Coffee can help you out. They not only have equipment such as espresso machines, brewers, and grinders, but they also have commercial refrigeration equipment as well to help you in the full spectrum of what you would need in the shop. Their mission is to literally equip you to make amazing coffee, and they do that through curating the best equipment from around the globe and also providing you with great resources on their website to learn about that equipment. That website is prima-coffee.com, and I would encourage you to peruse that website, look at what they have to offer, reach out to them, prima-coffee.com. And I know you're going to be happy working with Prima Coffee. Let them know that you heard about them on this show, and thanks so much, Prima, for your support of Keys to the Shop. This episode is also brought to you by the Pacific Barista Series. This is the groundbreaking and industry-leading line of plant-based performance beverages that are created alongside of and exclusively for the professional barista. So when you use the Barista Series in your shop, you can choose from many different kinds, the oat, soy, almond, rice. You will get a product that stands up to the heat from steaming, delivers a silky and latte art ready texture, and the flavor keeps the balance of the beverage focused on the coffee. So all of this makes it a perfect choice for your cafe's menu. I would highly encourage you to get these products in your store. See how your customers like it, see how your staff like it. I have a feeling you're going to be impressed. So go to pacificfoods.com to find out more. And thank you so much, Pacific, for your support of Keys to the Shop. All right, everybody. So today we are talking about employee culture like you have never heard it talked about before. It might be hyperbolic of me to say that, but I actually don't think so because, the culture of your employees will either make or break you and your business. And that's not hyperbole either. I think that's dead on. There's no shortage of books and lectures given on engaging with your employees and with a culture, but nobody has tapped into the vein of what makes culture work for or against you, like Stan Slap, today's guest. His way of delivering these massive insights is so insightful, cuts through the noise of what we're used to hearing about culture, and I'm such a fan of the way he approaches this subject. As I said, Stan's book, Under the Hood, is one of the books that I recommend to almost everybody that I talk to if books come up. I believe in it just as much as books like Setting the Table or It's Okay to Be the Boss by Bruce Tulgan. It is a foundational body of work, and so having him on the show today is just incredible. Now, Stan is the founder and CEO of Slap Company and has spent the last 3 decades specializing in achieving fierce support from manager, employee, and customer cultures. At Slap Company, they believe that within each of these groups, there is one problem that has the biggest impact on the enterprise and one solution that is the most valuable, coveted, and elusive. They have cracked the code on these problems, and their solutions are the highest rated in many of the world's top-rated companies. They are actively working in and have achieved amazing results in 44 countries and with companies such as Oracle, CNN, Timewarner, Google, eBay, Viacom, Microsoft, Starbucks, and many, many others. So in this conversation today, we are going to be diving into a little bit of Stan's story in creating this book, and then covering some of the 7 deadly sins of cultural engagement that he covers in the book, and talking about some solutions to these problems that we are probably more than likely doing in our cafes. The kinds of insights that you're going to find in this conversation, you're going to want to re-listen to this a few times. And definitely you're going to want to get the book after listening to this. I don't know how you couldn't want to get the book. I'm just really stoked to present this conversation to you. And I hope that it changes your paradigm of how you view employee culture in the same way that it has mine. So here now is my conversation about employee culture with the author of Under the Hood, Stan Slapp. Well, Stan, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the show. It really is an honor.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I'm honored myself.
I've read your book and taken so many great lessons from it. Your book, Under the Hood, is one of a handful of books that I recommend to consulting clients and coffee shop owners and anybody I meet on culture, because it's just such a great insight into a world that's so mysterious to people, and that mystery really causes them to step in it, for lack of a better word. But I want to know, how did your career and experiences in the professional world lead you to focus on employee culture as a catalyst for organizational health and success?
Well, my background initially was running and building retail companies. The last real job I had before I started my own company about 25 years ago was helping build this company, a retail company called Mrs. Fields Cookies. Took them from 19 stores to 300, put them in 4 countries. And everything was about the will of the culture. I mean, they not only sold the product and collected the revenue, they made the product, the people in the organization. I didn't really think about it as culture then, but that came into play later when I started my own company. And when I started my own company, IT, information technology, had really just begun to be huge. I mean, we didn't really have experience of companies growing at that accelerated rate to that level before. So my own companies, for about 6 months, our entire mission statement, it was on the whiteboard in our old conference room, was Oracle has a lot of money and they need to give us some. And so we actually got introduced to somebody at Oracle. We started to do some work for Oracle. It was very well received. Oracle was smaller then. It was like $8 billion, but still, back then it was a huge company. Anyway, they had just rolled out Ray Lane, who was running the company at that point, had just rolled out the company's new strategic intent to the top 500 or 600 managers. And I happened to be on campus when they got back from that offsite meeting. And the guy who ran their whole services division, a guy by the name of Robert Shaw, said to me, he saw me in the hallway as I was getting into the elevator. He said, "So what do you think of our new strategy?" I said, "I don't know. I wasn't at the meeting." And the doors are closing. And I said, "I don't really know where this came from." I said, "But I'll tell you one thing, pal. You can't sell it outside if you can't sell it inside." And this hand just reached through the elevator doors and dragged me back into the hallway and said, "What do you mean by that?" And I mumbled something. And he said, "Can you do that?" "Well, hell, I'm a consultant." "Yeah, that's exactly what we do." And so anyway, we put together a proposal. Oracle bought the proposal. It was a 7-figure proposal. And the experience of trying to get a company that was otherwise so wicked smart about so many things to understand what culture was really about caused me to actually say, here's all the mistakes you made. That became the 7 deadly sins, and that became the book, basically. I'm not blaming Oracle for what fortunately became the book. I'm just saying it really taught me that there is something that otherwise extraordinarily intelligent companies don't necessarily understand. And that's how it started for us. But the other thing, and I say this because some of your audience is running smaller organizations. When I first started in business, we were just a bunch of consulting sluts. We would do anything anybody wanted at any time for any amount of money. Now we're high-priced call girls, but back then we were just, whatever it took. But even in our unguided missile days, I knew two things about the company that I want for it. I wanted it to be a great company. Otherwise, what's the point of even suiting up? And I wanted to make sure that whatever we sold, somebody couldn't buy someplace else. If they didn't buy it from us, that was our problem to solve. But I was already bored with the concept of margin shredding commodity battles. So great companies, I say this to your audience, great companies are started by a deranged radical or a group of deranged radicals who have a hardcore point of view about what's right with the world that must be protected and wrong with the world that must be corrected. And they bring that to the business at Genesis because they bring it everywhere they go. They bring it to the supermarket. They're just obsessed with it. So even in its earliest days, when the value proposition of the enterprise is being developed, it's still being considered as, at least in some way, to be a delivery vehicle for building a better world. Even no matter what you're selling, you'd be selling office furniture, but you have a bunch of people selling it and you're selling it to a bunch of people. Let's saddle up and do something together to make the world a better place. Anyway, to me, the worst thing that one human being can do to another short of killing somebody is to make them feel small, to say you're not, you can't, you won't. And so that just drives me crazy. And the world works. We work. We're affected by people who work. So what became a mantra in my company in the early days is nobody should be diminished by business, working in it or buying from it. And culture is where the humans gather in business. And that became the focal point for me is if we can cause culture to be repositioned as a newly precious workable asset to a company, we'll cause a company to protect their culture because a company will protect anything that's an asset, especially if they just learned how to get more out of it. You can't protect this particular asset without protecting the humanity it represents and probably without rediscovering your own along the way. So I'm in business to make the business case for humanity. If we lose humanity in business, we're doomed. We save it company by company, manager by manager. We've saved ourselves. So I had already started thinking about that. Oracle just happened to be the anecdotal catalyst to me saying, well, how do we monetize this? How do we start building it as a solution? The book was written as my first book and as the third book, which I'm finishing now, in case Penguin asks you, I'm finishing it right now. It was only written after at least a decade of actually implementing these solutions. I didn't want it to be just generalized theory and academic blah, blah. I wanted to know that I could tell you something that would actually work because it's worked over and over again. So the experience the purpose came first. The experience and proof points came second. The book came third.
So when you talk about culture, as you're talking about it now, and in the book, it's sort of the crux of the book, that culture is, to you and in reality, really, its own entity that managers and leaders need to respect and are separate from. Can you elaborate on that point a little bit?
Yeah. And first of all, culture is the most overused, least understood concept in business. It was Merriam-Webster's word of the year in 2014. So according to the most popular dictionary in the entire English language, culture was the most searched for word in the entire English language. At my company, we say, banana had made word of the year instead. By now, companies would understand what a banana is and recognize it's not going to peel itself just to feed you. You actually have to know how to work the fruit, which I know that doesn't exactly sound right, but you know what I'm saying. So here's what a culture is. A culture is formed, whether it's the jungles of Samoa, or your own coffee company. A culture is formed whenever a group of people share the same basic living circumstances. And so they band together to share beliefs about how to survive. What are the rules of survival and emotional prosperity? If we're all in the same jungle, all in the same tribe, all with the same chief, then what are the rules of how we survive here? Not what's said, but what we have really figured out are the rules. And once we know we're going to be okay, how do we get rewarded emotionally and avoid punishment? When you get a group of people in those same living circumstances, they naturally band together to share this information. Because the more people looking for the safe watering hole, the safer it is for everyone. Culture is not the information. Culture is not the belief about the way things are around here. Culture is the independent, self-protective organism that obsessively collects data, validates it, and then shares those beliefs amongst itself. So a culture, basically your employee culture, is an independent organism living right inside your company with its own purpose and all the power to make or break any management plan and any manager. Its purpose is to protect itself, not you, not the company. And that's frustrating to management, who says basically, listen, if your purpose is to protect yourself, do your job and you'll keep it. Done.
Right.
You want emotional? I say, do a good job. We'll tell you you're doing a good job. But that would only work for your culture if your culture perceived a reliable through line between what happens to the company and what happens to the culture. And generally there's dirt in that machine. So let me just add that the more you learn about culture and the importance of managing it and maximizing its commitment, the more unmanageable it seems to be. I mean, if it's an independent organism that verifies its own information in its own way and keeps that to itself, doesn't share it with you because to share it with you would make it vulnerable, how in the world do you manage it? Well, the more you learn about culture, the more you understand it's the simplest operating system in the world. A culture is an information gathering organism designed to assure its own survival. It's kind of a constantly recalibrating belief system in the known dependable rules of survival and emotional prosperity. But the implications of this is that the culture's antenna is working 24/7, tracking you, seeking information. Its credibility detector is infallible. Its perceptions are alarmingly accurate. Its memory is elephantine. You cannot bribe, bluff, or bully an employee culture into sustainably believing or doing anything. You can't tell it what to believe. You can't stop it from existing. But you can recognize that your culture will give you whatever you want. You just have to give it what it wants first. I wrote the book to show managers and those running companies what a culture wants, because if you respect what a culture wants, there's a difference between its defiance and its compliance.
That's a great point. And as you're speaking about this, I'm thinking that there's a separation between managers and the culture in a sense where not only is it a power differential, but it's also us versus them mentality can creep in to that. And I've spoken with many owners and managers who feel that the employees have it out to sink their business, etc. And it got me thinking that it doesn't seem like, even though it is, as you say, an information gathering machine and its antenna is always up, that they're not holding meetings necessarily independently of the store meetings to try to come up with a plan to do this. It's just something that's naturally occurring as people gather together, and they might not even know that they're doing it necessarily.
Well, for one thing, the culture doesn't need to hold meetings. They have far more effective ways of communicating than the least effective way known to man, which is a meeting. But yeah, it's like the culture. The only thing that would cause a culture to actually be anti-company is if it perceived that it was deliberately being treated with disrespect, and that what the culture wanted, which was some sense of surety about its environment, was just not an issue of importance for management at all, or that it was lied to, or seriously misled. Any of those things would cause a culture to do that. And that's generally not the case in most companies. I mean, there are nasty companies that are just shameless and toxic, but most companies are just trying to get the job done, and the people in positions of management are decent people. So it's not that the culture is absolutely against the company. It will protect the company. But again, the company can't say, listen, we gave you the job, pal, so you come to us. It doesn't work that way. You got to respect this power of the culture and come to the culture as well. If you want the culture to buy something, like anybody buying anything, you have to know how it buys and why it buys. And as soon as you figure that out, a culture it's objective. It deals in the real. Its purpose is to protect itself. So It's objective. It's the most rational organism in the world. It's agnostic. It doesn't even mind bad news. It minds whether it can trust who's giving it the news. So you can definitely get a culture to do what you want it to do. But again, you have to give to the culture before the culture is going to give to you.
Well, that's one of the 7 deadly sins of cultural commitment, or how, or lack of commitment to the culture that people practice. You're just describing here, failure to respect the power of an employee culture. And I wonder, because I want to talk about a few of those, starting with that one, really, what do we do how do we fail to do this? How do we, practically speaking, fail to respect the employee culture, and how do we practice the opposite of that?
Well, first of all, when companies talk to a culture, when they talk to their culture, they talk about what, how, and why something needs to be done. And when a culture doesn't immediately resonate with that, fall to its knees in abject appreciation of the urgency of that, then the company talks louder, because clearly the problem was the culture just didn't hear us. And when that doesn't work, then it's campaign time. We need a slogan. We need a contest. We need a new font. When that doesn't work, it's just assumed that your culture has all the intellectual agility of a small soap dish and can't really appreciate the elegance and sophistication of the management strategy. But when you're talking to a culture, the what, how, and why doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is why not. Why, given the corporate logic and urgency of what you want your culture to do, and some presumed material benefit for the culture if it gets done, why would your culture not do it? And if your culture is not doing something, then it does not perceive, for what it believes is are empirical reasons, that it's safe and sane to do it. And so it's why not. When our company helps other companies all over the world, we focus on the why not restating the what, how, and why. But if you don't understand that, companies tend to think, well, a culture just doesn't have the intellectual firepower or the business sense or the ability to actually motivate itself, or none of that is true. Like when companies come to us and say, we need you to teach our culture how to be more accountable, or how to be faster, or how to be more innovative. You don't need to teach a culture that stuff. Those are latent behaviors. You need to convince a culture to give it to you. And if you're not getting that from the culture, it's not the culture's fault. But if you fail to respect this, then, listen, companies are regularly betting, if not their lives and their success, on the ability to implement new strategies, but a successful strategy isn't planned well; it is implemented well. And whether that's an internal strategy or go-to-market strategy, that is in the hands of your employee culture. If your culture wants something to happen, it's going to happen, and if it doesn't, it isn't. So I'm saying that the original sin is failure to respect the power of an employee culture in the first place, to make or break you in your filthy little strategies if it wants to. And I will say this as well, because it's always darkest before it turns pitch black. Your customers are generally employees somewhere themselves. And that means they're part of the overall employee culture. And they will decide to protect or reject your company based in large part on how they perceive you treat people just like them. Now, unless there are renowned circumstances, you're known as the best employer in your space or the worst, a lot of that perception is going to be an intuitive mind meld between your employee culture and your customer culture. But it's going to be based in large part on what kind of legitimate enthusiasm your people show for your products, your pricing, your policies. Because if I'm an employee somewhere myself, I know I'm never going to show that same kind of legitimate enthusiasm unless I'm being treated with a certain type of deep and rare respect. So if you have to respect the power of one thing in your business, it's the power of an employee culture to protect, course correct, and evangelize for you in the business.
That's what we want. We want people to take what we send them in our Slack channels or face-to-face meetings, or just as we talk to them in the shop. We want them to be evangelists for, in our case, coffee. We want them to talk about the new drinks on the menu, the new coffees on the shelves. And one of the other deadly sins that you talk about is the difference between communicating and convincing, which we're touching on here. Can you elaborate on that? Like, I get the feeling like it's not enough to simply communicate very well and eloquently with the right email format, etc. It's not going to be enough to convince somebody. How do we get that wrong?
Well, when you're talking to a culture, the purpose of communication is not to inform; it's to persuade. And if you're going to persuade the culture, if your communication is going to be persuasive, it's got to be sincere, heartfelt. It's got to be real. It's got to make an emotional case as well as an intellectual case, and it's got to be empathetic to the world of the people you're talking to. Now, corporate communication is all telling and selling. There's not a lot of listening going on, not a lot of empathy going along. So, one of the things I would say, just to get tactical from that, one of the things to do is what we call in our company the Greek chorus. Now, in olden days, in Greece and Greek plays, there was an actor, a group of actors called the chorus, who stood slightly on stage, slightly off center stage, and talked directly to the commented on the play directly to the audience. When you're talking to a culture, you have to do the listening for the culture. So in other words, if you're saying to the culture, listen, we're going to make this change here, and this is going to be better for you, better for everybody, better for you. Imagine what the culture is thinking at that point. And if you believe your culture is going to say, yeah, we've heard that before, then stop right there and say, now you may be thinking, yeah, we've heard that before. Well, let me tell you why this is going to be different. You have to do the listening for the culture. Otherwise, it's not real communication. It's just broadcasting. The other thing about communicating to a culture is you cannot be intimidated by the cynicism of a culture. Cynicism doesn't mean the culture doesn't care. Apathy would mean the culture doesn't care. Cynicism just means it hurts to care. So the culture still has plenty of commitment to give you, but it's got to be safe and sane to give it to you. So to meet cynical with chirpy the way companies do, like in blithe dismissal of any reality that faces the culture, it's you're going out of your way to say to the culture, listen, we don't know, we don't care. Let's go. So the better thing to do is to meet the culture at cynical, to take it to hopeful, to say, listen, you have every reason to believe that this is not going to work. I'm not saying trust me from here to here. I'm saying just trust me from here to here. Like in the next 60 days, here's 2 small things that will definitely happen in the name of what I'm telling you. And in the next 60 days, here's 2 small things that will definitely never happen in the name of what I'm telling you. Let the culture give you just enough trust where it isn't risking anything. Build momentum from there. But don't be intimidated. Don't think you can't meet the culture at cynical. And don't just do all telling and selling. If you can't listen with the culture, listen for the culture.
That's a great point. And so many of us have encountered these cynical moments that baristas have and workers in the cafe have, and it really takes the wind out of our sails, and a lot of initiatives are given up on. And you'd have to question, I guess, the commitment of the people putting the initiative forward, if that's all that it takes to sort of take it out of play. So the other sin of cultural commitment was presumption of rapid behavioral change, and how that kind of connotates a lack of patience that we have with the process and that change needs to take place. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, management in a company is focused on success. So it's always looking forward to see what can be sold next. A culture is focused on survival. It's always looking backwards to see what happened to the last thing that was sold. Did it work out as promised? I mean, if this were a trapeze act, there'd be a lot of casualties. And so So it appears that a culture has a notorious resistance to change. And that is so unfair to a culture. I mean, really, what does a culture care about most? It's survival. And the key to its survival is the certainty of its environment. So it cares about protecting the known rules of survival and emotional prosperity. What does any strategic or performance goal change do? It screws with the known rules of survival and emotional prosperity. So I used to know my job. Now you're changing that job. I have to re-earn my competency. Unsafe. I used to know people. I knew them. They knew me. Now we're being reorged. I don't have those relationships anymore. Unsafe. I used to know what my bonus meant when I got it. And from a cultural perspective, even more importantly, if I didn't get it. Now we have some new groovy comp program and the ceiling is higher, but I don't know what it means. Unsafe. A culture is not anti-management. It's not anti-business. It's not anti-change, but it's definitely anti-unsafe. The issue about change is a culture doesn't hate change. It hates the loss of the known that change represents, the known rules of survival and emotional prosperity. And so any change that is delivered, I mean, the C-suite clock starts before the culture's clock starts. By the time the culture hears about a change, it's supposed to understand it, embrace it, and translate into action all in about the same 60 seconds. So you can't really blame a culture for resisting this process. Any change is an uncomfortable reminder of how little control it has over its work life. And so it loses perspective. Well, we didn't see this change coming. Who knows what else is going to change? Maybe anything, maybe everything. And so the key, tactically, the key to this is to solve the problem that really must be solved. Now, your culture has all the intellectual, physical, spiritual wherewithal to deal with any change, unless it thinks it's dealing with everything potentially changing at the same time. Then what front do I fight this battle on? And so the key is to restore its perspective, to say you don't have to worry about everything changing. Just focus on this. And this is what companies fail to do consistently when introducing change to an employee culture. The key is that when you are explaining to your culture what is changing, you must take the time to explain what isn't changing. So if you had a bunch of employees in a room and you had 5 PowerPoint slides with 5 bullet points a piece saying, well, this is new, this is different, we're not doing that anymore, we're going here instead. Followed up with 50 PowerPoint slides that says, but here's who we have always been. Here's who we still are. Here's who we will always be. The big things, the small things, the great things, the annoying things. Most of your world remains consistent. Focus on this.
It serves to balance the way that we approach everything from the small changes to the big changes. For coffee, often it's the small changes of introducing new items without very much warning, except for a text message or email. With instructions and a little heart emoji at the end, or we're opening a new store and we're going to lose half our staff, but good news, we're opening a new store, but it doesn't seem like good news because we're losing half our staff of this one store to staff the other one. And bearing in mind that reassurance, it would go so far, and having lived through so many of those types of changes myself, 20 years of doing coffee, it puts the brakes on what managers and leaders want to do quickly, which I guess is probably healthier for the business anyway, because it gives more opportunity for thorough thinking through what's happening. So the last of the cultural commitment sins that I wanted to talk about here was the one that says big kickoff, little payoff. It seems like we do have this tendency in business to make a big deal about something, but the payoff is very little, and or it just fizzles into nothing. What do you mean in particular by big kickoff, little payoff, and how do we avoid this particular sin?
Well, most companies are really good about kicking off some new plan. They get all the collateral damage going, and especially in big companies, T-shirts, values, wallet cards, screensavers, mouse pads. But even in small companies, most companies are very good about kicking off a new strategy, and they're very good about explaining the end goal of the strategy, which is world domination of one kind or another. But if you do a great job of explaining to your culture where the strategy starts, and a great job of explaining to your culture where it ends, you really can't blame the culture for believing everything in between has been figured out too. I mean, if it's Christmas morning and one of your first gifts is a pair of bookends, you have to assume that under the tree is also a book of some sort. and when the culture finds out that's not the case, like you really don't, you know where you're starting, you know where you're ending, but management can't possibly have thought through every table stake, competency, milestone, benchmark, circumstance, contingency between starting and ending. The culture perceives that as you are forcing us down a dark, dangerous, unlit, unproven road. And where the rules of survival and emotional prosperity have just become less certain. And the culture's entire purpose for existing is to avoid that sort of thing. Plus, it wouldn't be the first time this happened for your culture. Any culture in any company has already had the delightful experience of taking its eye off business as usual to tilt towards some new world order and getting whacked on the head for it. So a culture is already preconditioned to be initiative weary and initiative wary. And also if the initiatives have like, here's the 10 things we need to do, the 7 strategic pillars, the 18 big bets, anything more than 2 or 3 things opens up too many battles for a culture to fight. It's not a matter of intellectual capacity. It's a matter of that until we understand this is a threat to us. And, you get more than 3 things, the culture just goes numb and just detaches. So anyway, big kickoff, little payoff, as is detailed in the book, is what to do about that, because management can't possibly know everything it needs to know. At some point, you got to announce a strategy and get people moving. The culture's not going to move until you know all this stuff. So how do you solve that problem? And the key is conceptually to light the path a little bit at a time, as if you had a lantern looking down as far as you could tell the culture. Here's what this road looked like. Maybe 90 days. And there's certain things that you can explain to a culture to make that road safe for 90 days at a time. And then you just keep moving the light down. 90 days, 90 days, 90 days. Really, if you can't explain to your culture that here are the choice points where you're going to find a crossroads in the next 90 days between doing things a new way and doing things the old way, here's the right road to take, where you're going to find that it doesn't seem like there's any easy sign one way or the other. Here's how to raise your hand and say, what do I do? Here's a couple things you can do where you don't even have to ask. You're doing exactly what we want you to, and you're safe. If you can't explain that kind of stuff to your culture for the next 90 days, you don't have any reason to expect your culture to follow you anywhere. So that's what big kickoff, little payoff is. It's solving that problem that seems unsolvable. Who starts first down that dark road?
Man, that's I love the lantern analogy used there, and it made me think about how we can drive at high speeds in the dark because we have headlights, but they don't light the entire way. We have enough faith in our ability to process the information of what's lit in front of us, and they're designed that way. So it seems pretty similar. When we're talking about culture, does this apply also to management? Because management in multiple locations of a company, there's the owners, and then there are the management group that might meet together. Well, a management group seems like a culture in and of itself as well. Would you say that's the case, or is that something different?
No, very true. And there are 3 groups that decide the success of any company. It's manager culture, it's employee culture, and it's customer culture. They all work fundamentally the same. It's not a bunch of managers, employees, and customers. It's the belief system that's created when those groups form a relationship with the company. Managers have their own culture because the rules of survival and emotional prosperity are different for managers than they are for the general employee population. The sources of information are different. All the nuances of survival and prosperity are different. Now, having said that, managers don't realize they have their own culture. a manager working in one company, in one position in Montana does not necessarily realize that a manager working in another company, in another position in Mumbai is also convinced they're trapped in some vague conspiracy between idiots above them and idiots below. But they do have their own culture, and it has to be, it works the same, but it has to be treated differently.
When we're talking about scaling this type of information, we have businesses that have single shops where you can have a staff meeting simply by turning around, and you've done it. And then there are multiple, anywhere from 5 to 100 stores where you've had a lot of experience with this. What does it take to effectively scale applying these types of behaviors that respect culture and develop good relationships with culture from store 1 to store 20?
Well, the good news is that you will never communicate, and it really is good news, you will never communicate as credibly to a culture as a culture will communicate amongst itself. So the key is not to talk to the culture, but to get the culture to talk to itself on your behalf. And the way a culture communicates is through legends. Now, legends are proof points about the connectivity between what management says and what management does. That would be a good legend. Or the lack of connectivity between what management says and what management does. That would be a bad legend. Either way, it's essential survival information for a culture. And that's the way cultures work. Something becomes a legend when it is vetted by the culture as this is a proof point about the way things really are around here. And when that happens, it's the culture's internal database. It's carefully vetted and carefully protected, but it's communicated amongst the entire culture. It's communicated the first hour of the first day that somebody shows up. They get a visit from the cultural welcome wagon to gift them with a legend to start activating them. So they're a pair of eyes and ears as well to start looking for information. Now we do work in 44 countries in my company, and we do work with a lot of companies that are truly multinational. And one of the things we do is a true cultural audit to really get your culture to talk to you like it talks to itself and explain its true hesitancy to commit and where that came from. And then what do you do about it? Now, I remember in they operate in over 100 countries, one company in particular. And we sent our analytic team to, I think it was 31 of those countries, to do ethnographic work once we'd done the quantitative and qualitative to say, here's what the culture is saying. Why would this culture say it? We heard the same stories in every country, almost word for word. And those countries did not have anything to do with one another.
Wow.
They just happened to work under the same umbrella. It's this stuff. It's a cultural legend is a bullet train on the Underground Railway. It jumps time and it jumps space. So the thing to do is deliberately create cultural legends. And very quickly, how you do that is first, you have to declare what is most important, dramatically, emphatically. And then you have to do something significant to prove you mean it. You have to protect it under pressure. You have to respond to those who mess with it and those who protect it for you. You have to be willing to play the fool in response to make your point. There's a lot of information in the book about how to do this, but this starts with context. Well, let me just give you one other thing. It is context really is everything for a culture. So we had a client come to us and they understood the importance of culture and the connection between culture and business performance. And so they made a list. They went through every policy and procedure that affected their culture with an eye simply toward improving it. And they did. I mean, they tried to make every policy and environmental concern that affected the culture. And they really did. They made material changes. And they got a performance bump as a result. And then things just flattened out and went back to where they were. So they called us. And what we said to them is, let's say you did 20 great things for your culture. Your culture, here's what you ended up doing. You did those 20 things for your culture, and your culture looked at those things and said, wow, those are good things. They're definitely better than the way things were. We like those things. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to drag that back to our own cave. We're going to put it on the scale. We're going to check the actuarial tables and the currency exchange rates. And we're going to come back to you and tell you what that's bought you. Because what you have inadvertently done is created a transactional culture. So your culture is saying, here's what it bought you. You want something else from us? Then give us something else. What you really wanted was a protective culture. And the difference would have been if you did those same 20 things, but before you did that, you declared dramatically, emphatically to the culture, this is what we believe about how this culture should be treated. Then those same 20 things are proof points that there is connectivity between what management says and what management does. And that transcends any material benefit. At that point, if you've got that kind of proof, this might actually be a safe place for us. And safe is worth protecting. So my bottom line answer to you is you don't have to communicate to a culture. You have to write the script that the culture will read to itself. A message from the culture to the culture has got more impact and credibility than anything you will ever send from your position outside the culture. And that's how you scale. Let the culture scale it for you.
Well, I think all of this that we've discussed, and of course, so much more in the book, is literally life-changing, not just for people who are tasked with management in a coffee shop or a business, but life-giving for the people that they lead as well. And I really thank you for taking the time to just lay all of this out so eloquently and with such impact. How can we find out more information about what you do and where we can, get this third book that's coming out soon?
Our company website is slapcompany.com. My personal email address is stan@slapcompany.com. If I can help you, I will. I travel around the world a lot. It might take me a little while to get back to you, but I can do that. My first book, Bury My Heart at Conference Room B, is all about achieving maximum commitment in manager cultures. This Under the Hood book is about achieving maximum commitment in employee culture. The third book about customer culture, I'm working on it, okay? I tell Penguin I would have had it done if I didn't have to take this call. It'll be out as soon as I can get it out. But in the meantime, we really do this work. So if you have any cultural issues, anything requiring measurable business performance driven by cultural commitment, that's what we do. So if you actually want to work with us, or you just have a question, either way, no salesman will visit your home. Just reach out.
Well, thank you so much again, Stan. Honored to have you on the show. Thank you for your work, and it really was great to speak with you.
Likewise, honored to be here.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation today. Huge thank you to Stan for coming on the show and elaborating on these ideas that I think are world-changing, life-changing insights into employee culture. This is something I think is so important because in retail coffee, we represent the coffee either well or not well. We create experiences for our guests. And if we are not healthy on the cultural level, then we are leaving a lot of impact on the table globally. That's one of the reasons why Keys to the Shop exists, is to help support and resource and give momentum to excellence in coffee retail. And this book, Stan's book, Under the Hood, is essential reading. I said it in the beginning, and I'll say it again. I really think that you should re-listen to this episode. Get the transcript for this episode, too. You can get that by being on the Keys to the Shop mailing list, where on a weekly basis we send out the transcripts from each episode, as well as some bonus audio. And in this case, Stan and I continue the conversation as I ask him about action steps that can be taken to implement some of these things. Like, what are some of the first actions that we can take to start implementing the ideas that he's shared in this conversation? that is sent out on the mailing list. So you can go to keystotheshop.com, and if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you will find a place to sign up for that newsletter. I would encourage you to go ahead and do that. Once again, a huge thank you to Stan for coming on the show, and look out for that new book that he's going to be delivering on customer culture. You're going to want to get all 3 books likely. Bury My Heart in Conference Room B on manager culture, Under the Hood about employee culture, and then this new book that's coming out on customer culture. And who knows, maybe I'll try to get Stan back on the show to talk about that one as well. But in the meantime, if you want to reach out to Stan and find out a little bit more information, you can email him at stan@slapcompany.com, or you can just go to slapcompany.com. If you want to learn more about what they do and inquire about their consulting, etc., that is the place to go. And if you want to reach out to me, you can just do so by emailing chris@keystotheshop.com with all of your questions, comments, and feedback. Or if you want to inquire about working with Keys to the Shop Consulting and training to help you in your coffee business, let's have a conversation about it and see what's right for you in your situation. chris@keystotheshop.com. Well, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for joining me. Have an amazing week. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.